Volunteers, they serve their community faithfully and they served their purpose for many years. You had a lot of these people by this point, let's say late 90s, early 2000s, who had been doing this stuff by this point like 15 years, 20 years, and they're set in their ways, and this is the way it has to be, very resistant to change. Welcome back to the podcast. So, as always, quick disclaimer before we get into it. The views expressed here by myself or any guests that I may have are not the views of our respective employers. This platform is just a commentary platform where we talk about EMS topics, education, and things of that nature. So sit back and enjoy. This is the Rig Report. First, I guess I have to say an apology. So I'm sorry to my regular listeners. I am a little bit behind. A lot of that has to do with it's been crazy at work. I've been pretty much doing a complete revamp of all our protocols. So it's been quite the adventure. And I've just not had time to really sit down and record or, any of that stuff. So there you have it. I apologize. I'm not dead. So I just have not had time. But today I want to talk about something. I'm sure I'm going to get some hate from this if I have any volunteers in the audience or will have at some point. So let me preface today's topic by saying I'm not out to get you, not per se, and you know I'm not out to badmouth the volunteers. Okay, but today I want to talk a little bit about basically the death of volunteerism and should it really go? So to understand the climate back then, and you're talking like 20 almost 25 years ago now and before, but I can only speak basically to my experience. So back around 24 25 years ago, volunteerism was pretty much what you had in these rural areas, especially Southwest Virginia. It was really rare to have a county run system. Everything was based off of the community got together or a town group of people, pillars of the community, got together in the 50s and 60s and 70s and said, hey, we have a need. We need to do something and have EMS coverage. And that's how a lot of these places got their start. Somewhere like my agency that I work for got its start by I think it was the Kiwanis Club, I believe, that first started all of this. So basically, it was a community-based thing, and they saw a need and said, "Hey, we need to do something about this." So they developed classes. They got instructors in with help through after the formation of the EMS councils. They got classes brought in, and people got certified. They went. There was even ALS providers back then in these areas when the rare odd class would become available. And man, volunteers they served their community faithfully and they served their purpose for many years. You had just basically it was people that the community knew because they lived there, and they served a very good purpose, filled a void that really needed to be filled. Where the problem came about is as things progressed, you had a lot of these people by this point, let's say late 90s, early 2000s, when I came along into this field. You still had a lot of the, how do I put this, older folks who had been doing this stuff by this point by like 15 years, 20 years, you know, and they're set in their ways, and this is the way it has to be. very resistant to change, you know. And I started out in this, so I got trained a certain way. It was kind of an old school way, and National Registry wasn't a thing. You did National Registry if you wanted to show off, was basically the gist of it. And as time went on, not too much time, because I started in 2000, December of 2000, and probably by the 2003, 2004ish, you're starting to see more and more about registry and changes they're making. And then the state starts getting involved, and there's less money available for funding for volunteers. They want you to basically get into registry. Registry made sure that ALS programs now had to be accredited. They had to be through a hospital or through a college. And of course, that costs money, and that was kind of the beginning of the end for the volunteers. And we hated National Registry and everything they stood for back then. I mean, I'll just be honest, because they were destroying what we had worked for. But after a while, and I can't tell you why. I don't know what happened to me personally. I don't know if it was the people I was around. I don't know if with the paid service I worked for, if it was being exposed to more professionalized systems. It kind of changed my outlook, because it was like one day I just looked around and I'm like, you know what? There are problems here. This volunteer model has a lot of problems, and it's probably a good thing that we're going away from it. Now, wait just a minute before you get mad and come at me with your pitchforks and torches. I have good reasons for this. But I do want to stop here for just a second and just to say that there are a very select few volunteer agencies out there still left that have evolved and grown to make positive changes and keep up with the times. And this podcast isn't about that. There are a very few out there, and I commend those people because they had the foresight to know that, hey, this is a medical field. It's based in science, and from the top down, I mean, the business model, the medical part of it, all of it changes. I mean, that's just the nature of this business. That's the way it works. But let's just take a look at the structure to start with. Okay, so a lot of the volunteer agencies still use this tiered officer system, right? And the first problem with that is you're only ever one election away from complete disaster. So what ends up happening is somebody gets butt hurt from some decision that your current officers have made, or they see something they don't like, and they decide, hey, I'm going to bring all my little buddies over from other places and get them membership. So they get in, they get voted into the agency, and then the next election you have, they make a run, a power play on the officers' positions. They get all their little buddies in there, and then disaster happens. Because typically those people are not officer material. They don't have the best interest of the agency in mind, and their only purpose is to be in charge. So what ends up happening is you get into things like drama. You have all this drama that happens. Your faithful members get tired of it and they leave, which is a terrible thing because I mean EMS as a whole already has limited numbers. That's one of our biggest issues is staffing problems. So eventually the agency is going to fold. Then you get the caliber of people is just not there. That's why embezzlement is so prominent in volunteer rescue squads. The caliber of people that can just come in one day and say, "Oh, I'm a member now. Now I have voting rights," and "Oh, well, now I'm an officer and I can do whatever." They have access to things that they really shouldn't have access to. And there's no accountability. There's no really stopping that without a better structure in place. And this old tiered system needs to go. Not to mention the other problems. Like there's typically a board. They have a board of directors involved, which it's hit or miss if you can get them all in the same room at the same time. Things take so long to get approved or decided because you're waiting on the board to get together, and it's just chaos. Whereas the more modern systems that have this person's in charge, this is the person that makes the decisions, and typically the requirements for that position is quite a bit of experience. So you, at the get-go, the person in charge making the decisions already has experience in what to do, and they can hit the ground running. So by contrast, the whole tiered officer system is just not as efficient because essentially you have a bunch of people that have taken on more responsibility. They've been elected to these positions, and because it's a second job to them typically, and because they're not getting compensated for the extra work. And let me tell you, I've served in almost every role in volunteer agencies. I've been in charge of trucks. I've been over the building. I was captain for 3.5 years. I've done training. I'm now currently doing training, and it is a lot of extra work not to be getting paid for it. So because of that, you can only get so much participation or so much enthusiasm about the job because they're not getting anything extra for that. And that's part of that old structure. That's the way it was designed. That worked well back in the day because let's face it, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you want to admit it or not, it's not the same world now as it was when volunteers were big, when volunteer EMS was thriving. People just their priorities are different. A lot of that has to do with inflation. It has to do with the accreditation thing we talked about earlier. You have to take care of your family. You can't do it for free. I mean, you'll volunteer yourself out of a house and food and livelihood. So you absolutely have to take care of yourself. And it's time that structure, I mean, it's time for it to change. So a lot of places, everywhere except for Southwest Virginia apparently, is going to county-based systems. And it's slowly, you can start seeing little glimpses of it right now where certain counties have kind of taken a step forward or step or two forward to take care of that and deal with it. And those are all good things. Besides the fact that it solves a lot of these other problems, it also takes care of the money problem because instead of just one agency by itself trying to stand on its own from its own billing, now you have this big pool of money coming from the county, or I should say larger pool of money, not big in some cases. And so the way Virginia works, the state is pretty much like, we can't deal with every area. We just can't. As a state government, they just can't micromanage every little area. So all the responsibility gets dumped on the county. The county would be the authority having jurisdiction. So it's their responsibility. And when that ball is in their court, you can guarantee that they don't want to drop it. They don't want to fumble that because the state will be breathing down their neck. By default, a county-based system is more apt to survive. There's more effort put into it, and typically your structure is already better because you have somebody in charge of fire and EMS, or they may separate it out if they're not a combined system. They'll have like a county fire chief, and they'll have a county EMS director, and then everybody underneath kind of falls in line for each location. They all have their own job to do. their hands aren't tied where they can actually make decisions and affect good changes, and you don't have to wait for some board to meet or all these extra hoops to go through. Hey, I see a need. This is what we need to do, and we jump in and do it. And like I spoke to earlier, there are requirements for these jobs. They don't just stick anybody in there. Like Joe Blow down the street that's had his EMT for like 5 days doesn't get put in an officer's position and has no clue what he's doing. There are actual requirements. Hey, you need to have been in some sort of administration in EMS for at least 5 years. There are requirements on a county level, and that's absolutely what needs to happen. So this brings me to my last ramblings, whatever, of the day, and I could rant about this for hours, but this will be the last for today. It baffles me, and I can't be the only person who sees this. I can't be, but it drives me crazy. For starters, because we're so worried about staffing, a lot of volunteer agencies will accept anyone. As long as you got a pulse and a patch, a warm body to sit in the seat, that's what we'll accept. Because we're so worried about having enough people to run the calls. And that's the bottom line, the numbers game. The problem is some of these people just they're not ready. For one, I mean, I'm sure they could be salvaged. These people that come in and they're just not trained well, they just, some of them haven't figured out yet that they don't need to be doing this job because it's not for everyone. I mean, I'll just put that out there. Um, and we'll accept these people, and when they mess up, we'll pat them on the shoulder and say, oh, it's okay. You'll do better next time. There's always another patient. And I mean, I know that sounds horrible, but that's the way it is. But on the flip side of that, even us as providers, if we go to the hospital, we're ready to cancel some nurse because they were in a bad mood and rude to us. We won't go to a PCP again because the doctor he didn't do something right, just right that we wanted. So we'll never grace his or her office with our presence again. So why is it that we hold these other medical professionals? Let me emphasize that again, medical professionals, which we are supposed to be, to this some higher level. We hold them to this higher level, but we won't do it to EMS providers. What's that about? That's insanity to me. We're all part of the medical field. Should we not demand the same kind of professionalism, the same kind of skill level, like entry level skill level, as we would any other medical field? I mean, we're at the level where we're doing things that could kill someone, even at an EMT, straight out of class. Some of these agencies have the ability that EMTs can give epi or epinephrine for anaphylaxis. Epinephrine can kill people. And why are we not holding these providers to the same standards we would any other medical profession? It baffles me. So I know for some of you, I'm probably preaching to the choir. A lot of you have recognized these problems, and there's no really one good answer to sit down and say, okay, that's it, we'll identify it and we'll fix it. There's a plethora of issues. One of the big ones is more rural areas are behind. We're probably 10 to 15 years behind the rest of our state. And there's no one thing I can pinpoint as a reason for that. It's several things. I mean, we don't have the hospital systems that they do in more populated areas. We don't have the provider pool. We don't have the big hospital and college systems to train new medics or new providers. I mean, there's just on and on. There's so many reasons and so many issues. But one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give any of you, if you're listening to me from a more rural area, be the change. Especially you new providers that are just coming in. Master your craft because listen, there's if you ever stop learning, if you ever stop and say, "Okay, I'm good. I'm as good as I'm ever going to get. I've learned as much as I'm ever going to learn." You have already screwed up. Never stop learning. Continue to advance. And whenever you get the opportunity, be the change. Step in, take charge, and help change this problem. Set a culture. And that's one of the things that I'm battling right now with a few other people. We're trying to change the culture where we're at. You know, you don't have to be at some prestigious agency to enact good changes. And that's what it's all about. We've got to get everything up to a better standard. And it's not just for us. I mean, it is for us. The better the agency, the better the system, the more they're able to pay and compensate you for your job, the better equipment you have, the better, more efficient things work. And that's always good for providers. But the end goal is it's better for the patients. I mean, we should hold ourselves, change starts at home. Hold yourself to a higher standard. And only then can you start holding other people to a higher standard. So be the change. That's my best advice to you right now. So thanks for listening. Catch us next week. We'll have another good episode coming out next Monday. And I'll see you next time.